the coming international disorder. Technology, development, and the modern world. The current global system is downright bizarre by historical standards. For the first time, any country can access markets the world over without needing to guard any aspect of its supply chains, and in most cases even its borders. What had been possible only for the major empires of the past can now be the core strategy for countries as diverse and traditionally weak as Uruguay, Korea, Honduras, Tunisia, and Cambodia. The Bretton Woods rules and the American free trade strategy at its core may be artificial and driven by strategic calculus, but they have resulted in the greatest era of peace and prosperity the world has ever known. Everyone can play the game of economic and social development, and play in relative safety. It is easy for us to forget how very different the past has been. Centuries of technological advances have created possibilities where few or none existed before. At their most basic, technologies allow people, if sufficiently armed with capital, to partially overcome their local geography and make it productive. The more difficult that geography, whether it be jungle, mountain, swamp, taiga, or desert, the more expensive it is to make it useful, and the more expensive to keep it useful. Economic and social development, then, are about figuring out how to use technology and capital to find out not only what is possible, but also feasible. Economists call this opportunity costs. For example, you may be able to build a road to the top of the mountain to reach a remote chalet, build it strong enough to withstand spring floods, plow it to keep it open in the winter, and repair it and clear it of avalanche debris in the summer. But with those same resources, you can build 50 times the length of road in flat lowlands and service several tens of thousands of people. Both tasks are possible, but only one is an efficient and productive use of resources, and therefore the more feasible. Feasibility comes down to money. If you don't have any spare cash, not a lot happens. If you are lucky enough to have access to credit, the question is, how much does that access cost you? The lower the cost of the credit, the more options within your reach. It really isn't any more complicated than that. In 2012, the average U.S. home price was about $250,000. With a 4% mortgage rate, that's a monthly payment of $1,200. Increase the rate to 8% and the monthly payment is $1,800. Cheaper credit makes buying a home or a larger home a more feasible option. The same concept holds for economies writ large. If capital is available and affordable, there will be more activity, more consumption, more infrastructure, more development. Every country has a set amount of indigenous or domestic capital that it can apply to its own development. But if additional monies can be brought in from the outside, then more development can occur. In the world before deepwater transport, what capital generation existed came from trade and taxes in individual river valleys. Money was tight. Credit, if it existed, was expensive. The world changed slowly. The development line, the point where an integrated economic and political system gives way to the frontier, or considering the Hobbesian nature of 15th century Europe, the front lines, was pretty damn close to home. The concept of foreign investment normally involved a foreign army, and was most certainly not sought out. Human development clung to the river valleys, with small archipelagos of nearby choice bits of land being linked into the riverine systems with short spurs of road. Only lands with the lowest development costs and highest outputs, lands that made absolute economic or strategic sense, were developed. Cities that grew according to this logic are Paris, Osaka, Stockholm, London, Genoa, Istanbul, Copenhagen, and Amsterdam. The dawn of deep-water technologies changed the world by allowing the European powers to reach out beyond their sequestered river systems and acquire empires. Borders in Europe remained hotly contested, but vast swaths of territories beyond Europe were brought into competing imperial systems. Money flowed back and forth between the seat of imperial power and these new provinces, each trading with and enriching the others. Additional money allowed for the digestion of additional lands, pushing back the development lines on both sides of the relationship. Territories that may not have quite made the cut in the previous era could be added. Swamps along rivers were drained. Rocks were removed from would-be farmland. Walls were built to defend areas that were too exposed to justify development in the previous era of scarcer capital. Cities that sprang from this model are Buenos Aires, Sydney, New York City, Cape Town, Barcelona, Hamburg, Liverpool, Havana, and Guangzhou. The industrialization technologies triggered another evolution, causing the land to bloom with crops and new constructions in ways impossible before. The development line wasn't so much pushed back, although it was, as redrawn. Instead of having isolated towns linked to a river valley by a single shoddy road, a rail line created a corridor of development between the two. The archipelagos of lands merged, along with many of the lands between them, into far more integrated zones. On the global scale, industrialization allowed potential city sites to import everything they needed: steel, timber, even people and transport infrastructure, to create metropolises from scratch. The old rules of what was possible could be suspended if you were willing to commit enough capital. Such insta-cities could be built to command a strategic position, to metabolize heretofore stranded resources, or to convert a dinky backwater outpost into something grand. As industrialization gained ground and the production and consumption of goods were augmented by the production and consumption of services, from cars, sneakers, and TVs to movies, overnight delivery, and the internet, urban populations became not simply a source of labor, but also revenue streams in their own right, due to their ability to generate income and capital. While so much more was possible, feasibility still constrained development. Some projects were so problematic that they didn't justify investment. Tsarist Russia never industrialized, for example, and some places were quite literally a bridge too far. This is how the world worked, right up to the end of World War II. Cities created or reinvented by these means include Moscow, Sao Paulo, Calgary, Manila, Singapore, and Denver. At that point, the Americans tinkering with the structure of the global economy through Bretton Woods generated yet another evolution, pushing the development line still further out. With all of the advanced powers now in the same alliance, government outlays on defense plummeted, freeing up more resources for development. The advanced economies were now able to sell freely into the American market, resulting in vast inflows of capital, creating yet more resources for development. Rivers were no longer required to generate economic growth because there was sufficient capital to develop transport systems from scratch. With such massive wealth flows, nearly all of the rich world's available territories became developed. It was inevitable that some of